Hey, it's Michael. This week, The Daily is revisiting some of our favorite episodes of the year, listening back and hearing what's happened in the time since they first ran. Today, we return to a mother and daughter who, along with hundreds of thousands of others, made a harrowing journey through the Darien Gap, and we find out where they ended up. It's Thursday, December 28th. Julie, tell us what we should know about this place, the Darien Gap.
So the Darien Gap is this narrow sliver of land between Colombia and Panama. It connects South and Central Americas. And this slip of land is a jungle, and it's an extremely inhospitable jungle. And this is because the territory is sheer mountains, intense mud. To be able to traverse it on foot is very dangerous because there are deadly animals, bugs, snakes, fast-running rivers.
Wow.
And it's sort of a changing territory, too, because it's incredibly wet.
Mm-hmm.
This place has no road. So for years, what you saw was that a small number of migrants who sort of heard word of mouth about the possibility of crossing, that they could do it, were braving this trek. And so you saw between 2010 and 2020 an average of under 11,000 people crossing a year. What you've seen in the last 2 years is an enormous historic rise in people crossing this very dangerous, in many cases, deadly jungle.
How many more people?
What we saw in 2022 was almost 250,000 people cross the Darien Gap.
And what explains why so many people are trying to take this treacherous journey right now?
So first of all, the pandemic really hit economies in South America hard. And because the crisis was region-wide, this left one way out. And that way out was north through the Darien Gap. And so we see traffickers advertising on social media, encouraging people to come through the gap, talking about this trek as if it's a vacation. So I needed to make sense of this contradiction that I was seeing between this incredibly harsh terrain, this idea that this place is an impassable jungle, and these numbers that we were seeing. And so my colleague Federico Rios, photographer, and I decided that the only way really to do this was to do the trek ourselves. And so we set out to cross the Darien Gap.
So tell us, Julie, about this journey.
So I started the journey in Necoclí, the beach town in Colombia that serves as the jumping off point for the trip through the Darien.
Mm-hmm.
Hola. Buenas. So from Necoclí, the migrants have to cross this large body of water, this gulf, to get to the point where the jungle begins.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to say, we were totally struck by the organization and the operation of the entire thing.
Daniel Jose Muñoz.
These formerly tourist boat, now migrant boat companies are calling the migrants one by one to, get on their assigned boat after they've bought their ticket. So we get on this boat with a large group of migrants on their way to start this journey. And we reach Capurganá, the last town before people enter the jungle.
So we are leaving now to begin this hike. We're a group of maybe 100 people. There's lots of children. Everybody is completely laden down with bags and mats to sleep on and things like that.
So we set off for what would be, for most of these migrants, a journey of somewhere between 6 and 10 days in the jungle. And pretty soon, the terrain gets very steep, and it's very hot. It's very hot. People are struggling, they're breathing hard, Some people start to cry. And then it starts to get really difficult.
Right, and somehow people are getting through this with children in their arms or on their backs.
Yes, lots of children. Lots and lots of children.
Wow.
So by the time that we are 2 days in, we really start to see people fall apart. They start to get sick. They start to get injured. There's a pregnant woman who we watch fall down an extremely steep hill. And it becomes clear that some people aren't going to make this journey. They're not going to survive. We did come across a dead body on the trail.
Wow.
You often heard adults singing with kids just to keep their spirits up. So by the fourth day, we have crossed into Panama. We are about halfway through the journey, and we're about to do the most difficult part of the trek, what is called the Hill of Death.
¿Cómo se llaman ustedes?
Ella se llama Sara.
Sara.
And it's on this hill that I meet Sarah.
¿Cuántos años tienes? 6. Y Sara es...
Sarah is this tiny 6-year-old girl from Venezuela. She's wearing this tiny pink t-shirt with sparkles on it.
¿Y cómo se nombre, señor?
And she is climbing the Hill of Death with a man named Ángel.
Ustedes sí son familiares.
Nosotros somos amigos.
Amigos, okay.
He's not her father. And I see Ángel help Sarah to make it up and then down the Hill of Death.
We're going to camp between a couple of trees by the river. Fede is making a clearing, basically, with a machete.
Okay.
La gloria de Dios, gigante y sagrada.
And, you know, as we're setting up camp for the night, I got to know Sarah a little bit more.
Estos amigos son amigos de la ruta. Está con...
Earlier in the journey, Sarah's mother had then become injured, and that morning had asked Ángel if he could help her by carrying Sarah at points, by guiding her while she trudged along in her injured state. And by the time I met them, no one knew where her mother was. It wasn't clear to us if she was even alive. It really seemed to exemplify what a cruel journey this was, that a mother would be pushed, some would say forced, to hand her child, the fate of her child, to someone she had really just met, all in the hopes of making it through the Darien Gap and making it to the United States.
We'll be right back. So what happens the next morning?
So Sarah's group wakes up very early and they tell us that they are going to head out.
Buenos días, ¿cómo vas?
I asked Sarah for a description of her mother in case I saw her later that day and could interview her, could tell her that Sarah was okay.
¿Cómo es tu mamá? Físicamente, ¿cómo es tu mamá? Por si
And
la-
I'm told that Sarah's mother looks exactly like her. Same hair, same skin. Sarah's group leaves, and Fede and I decide we're going to wait and hope that we find the mother. And sure enough,
Tienes...
a few hours later, a woman matching the description we were given comes down the hill. And I ask her, "Are you Sarah's mother?" And she exclaims, and she wants to know immediately if her daughter is okay. By this point, it's been more than a day since she'd seen her only child. They'd been on this journey for about 6 days so far. Her name is Alexandra. Sarah's mom tells me that she has terrible blisters on her feet.
Nos sentamos, bueno, nos sentamos
So
aquí. Yo tengo
we
una-
sat down on a log by a river, and I asked her what landed her here. How did she get here? Why is she here?
Yo soy abogada y en Venezuela tengo mi ejercicio.
She told me she was a lawyer in Venezuela, but when the country's oil industry collapsed, her business collapsed. So earlier that year, she had left Venezuela, crossed on foot the Atacama Desert to make it into Chile, where she thought that she could build a new life. But
Pero como entré ilegal, no pude hacer nada. A pesar de que
she
llevaba mis
couldn't practice law there because she didn't have the right paperwork. And
A raíz que vi las noticias que estaban dejando.
Alexandra tells me that she's under the impression that the U.S. will let her in and let her stay in the country. And this is where she wants to raise her daughter. That's what brought her on this trek in the first place.
Las personas que tengan niños no se vengan por aquí. Es arriesgado. Es muy mal.
She's just horrified by the fact that she's become separated from her daughter. She's horrified by what her daughter is going through.
Es muy, muy apegada a mí. Y me la imagino llorando. Voy a ir caminando lo más que pueda.
So we say goodbye, and I continued on, hoping that I might catch back up with Sarah and tell her that her mother was alive and okay. By this point, it's day 7. We are exhausted, but Fede and I are still moving much faster than Alexandra, and we think we might be able to catch up with Sarah at the next camp.
So we're finally arriving at a place called El Abuelo.
The next camp is a place called El Abuelo, and as we settle in, I start scanning for Sarah.
¿Por qué lo cocinan con una cuchara tan grande?
And I spot Sarah and Angel, and I immediately tell Sarah that I've met her mom, that she's just a day or 2 behind.
Anoche sí lloró
Bastante.
And Angel tells me that since I last saw them, Sarah has been crying a lot.
¿Por qué no esperamos a mi mamá?
Tu mamá no llega hoy, mamá.
She's been asking about her mom nonstop. And as I'm talking to her, she's asking to wait at this camp, to wait at El Abuelo for her mom to meet them there. But Angel has decided that what they need to do is get to the end of the trek where there's a government camp where children who have been separated along this journey can stay until they are reunited with their parents. So I tell them that I'm staying behind to do reporting and that Alexandra is probably a day behind. I know I can wait and try and connect with her at this camp.
So what happens next?
So we're waiting at El Abuelo. I see this boat arrive.
Alexandra has just arrived on a boat.
Me duele mucho, no puedo caminar. Anoche me dio fiebre y escalofrío. Tuve mucho escalofrío.
Her feet are so destroyed that she can't walk. She's like crying and she's shaking.
Tenemos ya 2 días que no comemos ni tomamos líquido.
¿Y comiste ahorita?
No, allá comí.
She hasn't eaten or had anything to drink in 2 days.
Quiero ver a mi hija, me tiene desesperada.
Está bien. Sí. Sí.
I tell her that I saw Sarah, that Sarah is just up ahead. And all she wants to do is get moving immediately. She doesn't want to eat. She doesn't want to sleep. She doesn't want to rest. She just wants to find her daughter. And so we get in this boat to head toward the government UN camp together.
So this is Alexandra arriving at Canan, which is this community in Panama where her daughter should be.
So we get off the boat. As before, she needs to be carried. She's scanning for her daughter. And finally, she is taken by Panamanian officials to one of the shacks. And there, inside the shack, is Sarah, is her daughter. And we are watching this reunion happen. And Alexandra just, she grabs her daughter, she holds her, and she starts asking for forgiveness right away.
Perdona, mami. Sí, me perdona, nena. A mí se enfermó.
Please forgive me, please forgive me. I didn't abandon you, is what she says. They had been separated now For 3 days, Sarah seemed kind of to be in shock. It was a very bittersweet reunion because they hadn't even made it near the United States. They still had so much more to do.
After the break, Julie Turkowitz gives us an update on what Alexandra and Sarah are now doing.
This is Julie Turkowitz, Andy's bureau chief. Since this episode aired, my colleague Federico Rios and I have kept in touch with Alexandra. After Alexandra and Sarah crossed Darien Gap, they continued their journey north to try and get to the United States. And as they were traveling through Central America, they heard that the Biden administration had made a really important policy change. The new policy would no longer allow Venezuelans to enter at the Mexico-US border. Instead, the government was going to open up slots for Venezuelans in a program called humanitarian parole. And it was going to give them a safe, legal way to get into the United States. So Alexandra decides that she has just suffered too much. She does not want to risk her daughter's life anymore on any other part of the journey. And she is going to apply for this legal option. She just has one problem, and that's that for the humanitarian parole program, you need to have a person in the United States who says, hey, I commit to supporting this person, even financially, when they get to the United States. And then the article comes out, and we had a huge, huge response from New York Times readers, several of whom reached out and said, we want to be the sponsors. And they submitted applications for this humanitarian parole program. So now we are more than a year later. All Alexandra has heard from the US government is that it has been received, and she wakes up every morning, checks the status of her application, and refreshes, hoping that one day it will say that her application has been accepted and that she will be able to come to the United States. Meantime, they are in a pretty unstable situation. They've asked us not to reveal their specific location. They are in a situation of poverty, and Alexandra really tries to maintain hope. In the time since the episode aired, I have also been speaking with Angel. Angel is the man who helped Sarah when she lost her mother in the jungle. He took a very different path, and he decided to continue on to the United States. He eventually made it to Pennsylvania. He got a work permit and a social security number, and now he's making $140 a day as a mechanic. And life is difficult. His family is now broken apart, but he feels that in the US, making this amount of money, he can deliver on what he set out to do. And this is what made him cross the Darien. He can help his child back home, and he can fulfill what he sees as his duties as a father. So last year, when we were with Alexandra and Sarah, 248,000 people crossed the Darien Gap. That was a record annual high. This year, we are about to hit 500,000 people crossing this jungle. The word is out that the Darien Gap is this treacherous pathway to the United States, and you see large numbers of Ecuadorians, of people from China, people from Afghanistan, taking this route, and they are fleeing economic instability, political instability, conflict, war. It's not that they don't know that the Darien Gap is dangerous. It's that many of them are making the calculation that the potential reward is worth the risk.
Today's episode was produced by Sydney Harper and Carlos Prieto, with help from Nina Feldman and Claire Tennisgetter. It was edited by MJ Davis-Lynn and Patricia Willens, with help from Lisa Chow. Fact-checked by Susan Lee. Contains original music by Alicia Itube and Dan Powell, and was engineered by Brad Fisher and Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Landsberg of Wonderly. Special thanks to Eileen Sullivan. That's it for the Daily. I'm Michael Barbaro. See you tomorrow.